Hello again, 102. In this video, we will assess some of the issues and developments that led to the victory of President Barack Obama in 2008. And as mentioned in the last video, Hurricane Katrina was a huge disaster. And in 2005, President Bush's eroding public support suffered another blow, this time when a natural disaster turned into a political crisis. In late August, a killer hurricane named Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast, devastating large areas of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Katrina's awful wake left over 1,000 people dead in 3 states and millions homeless and hopeless, especially in New Orleans. The devastation caught the local political officials and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, unprepared as the catastrophe unfolded. Disaster plans were incomplete, confusion and incompetence abounded. In the face of blistering criticism, President Bush accepted responsibility for the bulky federal response to the disaster and accepted the resignation of the FEMA director. And this was an awful, and this hurricane really wiped out New Orleans. Most of the city was underwater after the dikes collapsed. And in the November 2006 congressional elections, Democrats capitalized on widespread public disapproval of the Bush administration to win control of the House of Representatives, the Senate, and a majority of governorships and state legislatures. Former Texas Republican Congressman Dick Armey grumbled that the Republican Revolution of 1994 officially ended with the 2006 election. And Nancy Pelosi became the first female Speaker of the House. And this coincides with mounting public disapproval of the Republican Party. There was an economic shock. And that's the big reason for Obama's victory. Because after the brief 2001 recession, the boom-bust capitalist economy had begun another period of prolonged expansion. Between 1997 and 2006, home prices in the United States, especially in the fast-growing Sunbelt states, rose 85%, leading to a frenzy of irresponsible mortgage lending for the purchase of homes and a debt-financed consumer spending spree. Tens of millions of people bought houses they could not afford, or they refinanced mortgage and bought another home. They tapped home equity loans to make discretionary purchases. The irrational confidence in soaring housing prices also led government regulatory agencies and mortgage lenders to ease credit restrictions so that unqualified people could buy homes. Financial collapses typically follow real estate bubbles, rising indebtedness, and prolonged budget deficits, and that's what we had in the first decade of the 21st century. And the housing bubble burst in 2007, and when home values and housing sales began a sharp decline. During 2008, the loss of trillions of dollars in home values set off a seismic shock across the economy. Record numbers of borrowers defaulted on their mortgage payments, and they put their keys in the mailbox and they walked away from those expensive homes that they shouldn't have bought. Foreclosures and bankruptcies soared. Banks lost billions, first on the shaky mortgages and then on most other categories of debt as unemployment rose. Credit cards and car loans and student loans and an array of commercial mortgage-backed securities. And sudden contraction of corporate spending and consumer purchases pushed the economy into a deepening recession in 2008. The scale and suddenness of the slump surprised most economic experts and business leaders. Some of the nation's most prestigious banks, investment firms, and insurance companies went belly up. Wachovia Bank in the South failed. The price of food and gasoline also spiked. Unemployment soared. What began as a sharp decline in home prices became a panicky global economic meltdown. No investment seemed safe. And the Great Recession was a massive, prolonged economic downturn sparked by the collapse of the housing market and the financial institutions holding unpaid mortgages. And it resulted in 9 million Americans losing their jobs. And the economic crisis demanded decisive action to stem the panic and restore confidence. On October 3rd, 2008, just before the presidential election, President Bush signed into law a bank bailout fund called the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, that called for the Treasury Department to spend $700 billion to keep big banks and other large financial institutions from collapsing. Yet the passage of the bill did little to restore confidence. In early October, stock markets around the world began to crash with the onset of what came to be called the Great Recession, which technically lasted from December 2007 to January 2009, forcing almost 9 million people out of work, as we mentioned. Its effects, however, would last long thereafter. The economic recovery that began in June 2009 would be the weakest since the end of the Second World War. The age of prosperity is over, announced the prominent Republican economist Arthur Laffer. He's the guy who started supply-side economics back in the late 70s with the Laffer curve and the idea of cutting taxes that in the long run is actually going to give government more revenue. That voodoo economics. Taken together, the endless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, coupled with a slumping economy, shattered public support for the Bush administration and for the Republican Party. During his last year in office, Bush's public approval rating was an abysmal 25%, just 1 point higher than Richard Nixon's during the Watergate investigations. And this will culminate in an historic new presidency. Barack Obama and his family, when they were much younger. Obama was the first African-American presidential nominee of either party, the gifted biracial son of a white mother from Kansas and a black Kenyan father who left the household and returned to Africa when Barack was a toddler. Obama made the most of his abilities, eventually graduating from Columbia University in New York before earning a law degree from Harvard. The 47-year-old senator presented himself to voters as a leader who could inspire and unite a diverse people and forge bipartisan collaborations by promising a politics of hope. He mounted an innovative internet-based campaign directed at grassroots voters, donors, and volunteers. And in early June 2008, he gained enough delegates to secure the Democratic nomination alongside Senator Joseph Biden of Delaware as his vice presidential running mate. Obama radiated poise, confidence, and energy. By contrast, his Republican opponent, 72-year-old Arizona Senator John McCain, was the oldest presidential candidate in history, and the Republicans really didn't have a chance in this election. As a 25-year veteran of Congress and a leading Republican senator, he had developed a reputation as a bipartisan maverick, willing to work with Democrats to achieve key legislative goals. And here are the results of the election of 2008. Obama won a solid electoral and popular vote count. And the big difference is you have Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Indiana, and Ohio, and a couple of the smaller states here voting for Obama instead of Republicans. And you can see the difference here between those results. Those big states voted Democratic, and that led to Obama's victory.